Picture a mansion that barely sees a human being. 98 rooms of marble and glass sitting over one of the most famous parks on the planet. And most nights, nothing moves inside it. No dishes in a sink, no shoes by the door. Its top floors flicker to life for maybe a handful of parties a year, and the rest of the time, it just sits there, silent, worth more than entire small towns put together, more than the total property value of some American counties. The man who bought it dropped $238 million on the place, cash, and he almost never sets foot in it. Not because he can't, because he doesn't need to. It's not a home. It's a receipt. Now picture who that man has to be. A guy trading stocks out of a college dorm room before he could legally rent a car, running a satellite dish off his roof just to get quotes a few seconds faster than everyone else. Someone who started his own fund at 22 with a few million borrowed dollars and turned it into one of the biggest financial operations on Earth. A trading engine that reportedly touches roughly 1 out of every 5 stock trades made in America, every single day on autopilot. A net worth pushing past $50 billion, more than the GDP of entire countries. And in 2019, he closed the deal on the priciest home sale this country has ever recorded, a penthouse stacked 90 stories above Central Park. Then, a few years later, he grabbed his whole operation, thousands of employees, billions in infrastructure, the entire nerve center of one of the most powerful trading firms on the planet, and relocated it to Miami. That's Ken Griffin. And this past spring, on tax day of all days, New York's mayor walked straight up to that empty penthouse, hit record on his phone, and unveiled a brand new tax built specifically to target homes just like it. Not homes in general, that home. But the real bombshell didn't land that day. It landed 3 months later, buried inside a New York budget fight, a number that should make every governor in the country nervous. Because it isn't really about Ken Griffin at all. It's about what happens when an entire state's finances start leaning on people who have every legal right to just leave. And before you decide this doesn't touch you because you don't live in New York, is it really the tax chasing these fortunes away? Or were they leaving regardless, tax or no tax? Tell me what you think in the comments because I want to hear both sides of this one. And hit that subscribe button right now because this video connects pieces nobody else in the media is willing to put together in one place. Let's dig in. Rewind to that penthouse doorway. On April 15th, 2026, tax day, timed on purpose, Mayor Zoran Mamdani stood outside 220 Central Park South, Griffin's building, camera crew in tow, and filmed himself rolling out what he called New York City's first ever pied-à-terre tax. In plain terms, a pied-à-terre is a secondary residence in a city that isn't actually your home, a place you touch down in a few times a year, not where your life happens. This new tax slaps an annual surcharge on homes worth more than $5 million when the owner's legal residence is somewhere else entirely. It was engineered, almost surgically, to catch exactly one kind of person: ultra-wealthy, technically absent, symbolically perfect. Mamdani is 34 years old, a self-identified Democratic socialist who won the 2025 mayoral race with just over half the vote, running on one core promise, repeated at every rally on every flyer: tax the rich. This tax was him cashing in that promise at the most theatrical location he could possibly find, and Griffin didn't just let it slide. Reports on the fallout say he threatened to yank a $6 billion Park Avenue development project out of the city entirely, a project that would have meant thousands of construction jobs and years of economic activity. $6 billion, dangled and then nearly pulled off the table, all triggered by a video shot on his own sidewalk. If you're the type who likes watching two powerful people go head-to-head over a video, subscribe now, because this channel breaks these fights down piece by piece. Let's back up and look at who Griffin actually is, because the backstory matters more than people realize. He's a Florida native, raised near Boca Raton, who began trading out of his Harvard dorm room in the late 1980s, rigging up a satellite dish just to pull in stock quotes faster than the guy down the hall. In 1990, barely out of college, he launched Citadel with a few $1 million in seed money from a handful of investors who took a chance on a kid. He turned it into a giant. Its sister company, Citadel Securities, became one of the largest market-making firms in the entire country, quietly processing a jaw-dropping share of daily stock volume in America. His personal fortune eventually cleared $50 billion, placing him among the wealthiest people on the planet, and definitely the wealthiest person to ever call a New York penthouse home, even part-time. Then, in 2022, came the move that matters most to this story. He relocated Citadel's headquarters, and himself, from Chicago, not even New York, Chicago, to Miami. The penthouse stayed behind. He didn't. Which is exactly why that apartment turned into such an easy political target. A $238 million home whose actual owner lives 1,000 miles south, in a state with none of New York's tax burden, is precisely the kind of case Mamdani's new tax was designed to catch. It's not subtle. It was never meant to be subtle. But here's the real story underneath all of this. The tax itself is just a symptom, a headline, a photo op. The actual reason someone like Griffin runs his empire out of Florida in the first place comes down to simple, cold, repeatable math. And once you see the numbers laid out side by side, this entire situation looks completely different. Less like a rich guy being greedy, more like a rich guy doing arithmetic anyone with a calculator could do. Start with income tax, because it's the biggest and most obvious gap. A top earner in New York City pays a combined state and city rate of roughly 14.8%, nearly 15 cents of every dollar earned, gone before it ever reaches a bank account. In Florida, zero. Not reduced, not phased in, zero. Because Florida has no state income tax at all, a fact written into its state constitution. Now look at corporate tax, the rate that determines how much a company like Citadel keeps after doing business. New York's sits at 7.25%, and Mamdani has pushed to raise it even higher, as high as 11.5% in his original campaign platform. Florida's corporate rate holds steady at 5.5%, a number that hasn't budged in years because Florida actively markets its tax stability to businesses considering a move. Then there's the piece almost nobody wants to talk about out loud, the estate tax, the bill your family gets handed after you die, on top of everything you've already paid in taxes across an entire lifetime. New York can claim up to 16% of a large estate. Florida takes nothing, not a single dollar. For a fortune worth tens of billions, that's not a small gap. That's not even a large gap. That's generational. The difference between a family losing a chunk of its wealth every single generation or keeping it whole for 100 years. And now, stack the brand new pied-à-terre tax right on top of everything else. On the priciest properties, it runs over 1% of the home's value, every single year, forever, with no end date and no cap written into the law. Smash that subscribe button if you're actually following the numbers here, because this is the part most coverage skips entirely. Add it all up honestly. Income tax, corporate tax, estate tax, and now this brand new annual property surcharge that exists only in New York. And every single figure points in the exact same direction. This was never a close call. It's not a tough decision weighed carefully over years. It's a well-worn exit route that hundreds of wealthy families and companies have already walked down before Griffin ever did. Mamdani has actually bragged about backing New York into this corner, even admitting in budget testimony, on the record, that the city was, in his own words, placed on a ledge. Not forced there by outside pressure, placed there, deliberately, as policy. And Griffin is far from alone in running these numbers. Carl Icahn, the legendary activist investor known for shaking up entire boardrooms, relocated himself and his firm to Sunny Isles Beach back in 2020. Paul Singer moved Elliott Management, a $41 billion hedge fund, one of the most feared names in finance, from Midtown Manhattan to West Palm Beach that same year. Paul Tudor Jones, a billionaire trader with decades of New York history behind him, left for Palm Beach. Alliance Bernstein shifted major operations to Nashville, taking hundreds of jobs with it. Early in 2026, Wells Fargo announced its wealth management division would be based in West Palm Beach, reportedly the first major U.S. bank to plant that kind of core business in Florida, a move analysts called a signal flare for the rest of the industry. Goldman Sachs has quietly been building out a Florida presence for years, while steering senior roles toward Dallas instead of New York. When Bloomberg dug through corporate filings across thousands of firms, they found that in just 3 years, New York lost companies managing close to $1 trillion in assets to lower tax states. $1 trillion in managed assets walking out the door in 36 months. Subscribe if this is the kind of story you want more of, because there's a lot more where this came from. Because those huge numbers hide real people underneath them, and this is the part that gets lost every time this story gets told. When a firm packs up and leaves, the partners land fine. They've got the money, the mobility, the options. It's the analysts, the assistants, the compliance staff, the office managers, who built their entire lives around a New York address they assumed was permanent, who actually get hurt. The deli that survived off the lunch rush from 400 employees a day. The parking garage that had a waiting list. The dry cleaner down the block that pressed suits for the same 12 people every single week for a decade. None of them were in the room when the decision got made. None of them got a vote. They just show up one Monday and find out the lease wasn't renewed, and the floor they worked on for years is going to sit empty for the foreseeable future. Here's the number we teased at the very top of this video. In the Tax Foundation's 2026 Tax Competitiveness Rankings, New York landed dead last, 50th out of 50 states, behind every single other state in the country, including states with far smaller economies and far less at stake. New York has also slipped from having the second largest millionaire population in the country to 4th place, overtaken in order by California, by Texas, and by Florida, the exact state Griffin and so many others have been running to. And here's why that ranking actually translates into real financial pain. In July 2026, a watchdog report revealed something that deserved far more front-page attention than it ever got. New York's share of the nation's millionaires dropped from 12.7% in 2010 down to 8.7% by 2022, the steepest decline of any single state in the entire country. Faster than California, faster than Illinois, faster than anywhere else people love to point fingers at. The price tag attached to that single year's slide? Roughly $11 billion in personal income tax revenue the state never collected, simply because the people footing the largest share of the bill packed up and moved somewhere else. This matters so enormously because of exactly who those people are. In New York, the top 1% of earners cover about 45% of all state income tax revenue, nearly half of everything the state collects, coming from a razor-thin slice of the population. So when even a small fraction of that group leaves, the hole they leave behind isn't a dent, it's a crater. Less revenue triggers pressure to raise taxes on everyone left behind. Higher taxes give the next high earner sitting on the fence a very good reason to start looking at Florida too. And the cycle spins faster with every single turn of the wheel. New York's been stuck in this exact loop for over a decade now, and there's little sign the people writing tax policy in Albany have connected the dots between cause and effect. If you want the full picture on stories like this before anyone else covers them, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep digging. Even Jamie Dimon, CEO of the country's largest bank, said the quiet part out loud in his May 2026 letter to shareholders, a letter read by investors, politicians, and rival CEOs alike. He pointed out plainly that New York carries the highest combined city and state corporate and individual income tax burden anywhere in the nation. And he framed it not as a question of loyalty or morality, but as a straightforward competitiveness problem, the same way you'd talk about labor costs or shipping routes. His own company backs that framing up with actual numbers. Over the last decade, JP Morgan added roughly 6,000 jobs in Texas, while cutting roughly 6,000 jobs in New York, a one-for-one swap playing out in slow motion over 10 years. A senior analyst at the Tax Foundation summed the whole situation up in one blunt line. Wall Street is the golden goose. The only real question left is for how much longer. And New York's response is the part that should genuinely frustrate anyone paying attention, because the mayor isn't easing up in the slightest. He's doubling down harder. In July 2026, asked point blank in an interview about millionaires fleeing and the tax revenue disappearing right along with them, Mamdani showed no real concern whatsoever. He simply stated that the wealthiest residents can afford to contribute a little bit more, brushing past the $11 billion figure entirely. Weeks later, his office mailed formal notice letters to wealthy second home owners across the city, warning them the new pied-à-terre tax was officially coming. And his team even posted about the mailer online with a wink, riffing on the old dial-up "you've got mail" line, treating a policy that could accelerate an exodus like a punchline. To be fair, and it's worth being fair here, the mass exodus that the loudest voices predicted hasn't fully materialized, at least not yet. Manhattan office leasing and rents actually rose in early 2026 as vacancy rates dropped, a sign the city still has real gravitational pull. Millionaires relocate less often than people assume. Moving your entire life, family, and business is genuinely hard, even with tens of billions in the bank. And New York remains, for now, the financial capital of the world, with an ecosystem of talent and infrastructure that took a century to build and won't vanish overnight. That resilience is real. But resilience isn't the same thing as immunity. And a city that responds to a visibly shrinking tax base by publicly taunting the small group of people who pay the largest share of its bills is gambling everything on how long loyalty and simple inertia will keep holding the whole structure together. Subscribe now so you don't miss where this story goes next, because it's nowhere close to finished. And this isn't just about one billionaire and one penthouse anymore. California is watching its own companies and founders quietly drift toward Texas, while Sacramento reaches for the exact same playbook Mamdani is running in New York. Illinois keeps bleeding corporate headquarters year after year with barely a headline to show for it. The same underlying story: rising taxes, a shrinking base of people actually paying them, and a political class that responds to every single warning sign by proposing yet another tax, is playing out across blue states, one after another, almost like a script being read from the same page in different accents. If you live anywhere near one of these states, this exact trend is already headed toward your doorstep, whether the local headlines have caught up to it yet or not. Which brings us back to exactly where we started. That penthouse, 90 floors above Central Park, the most expensive home ever sold on American soil, dark most nights of the year. Its owner, 1,000 miles away in Florida, in a state that lets him keep what New York would take from him. And that video of the mayor standing on its sidewalk is still sitting online right now, racking up views, a permanent monument to the whole misunderstanding at the heart of this story. Because Griffin didn't leave over one single tax, one video, or one mayor. He left because the math stopped working years before that camera ever started rolling. And no amount of political theater staged on a rich man's doorstep changes an answer that was already written in spreadsheets long before anyone showed up with a phone. So here's the real question worth arguing over in the comments. What would New York's leadership actually need to change, specifically line by line, to close this gap with Florida? Not vague promises, actual policy. Because New York can keep plucking away at the golden goose for as long as it wants. The only question that actually matters now is how many feathers that goose has left before it simply stops flying south for anyone. And if you made it this far, you clearly care about this stuff. So subscribe, drop your take in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.